Hi, and welcome to KXAM Plus. Thanks for joining us. I'm here with our Nick's First Warning weather episode. I'm your host, Esmeralda Zamora, and with me to do this is, of course, Nick Bannon, but also Tommy House in the mix. How you doing?
All three of us here with you
Let's go.
to walk you through some potentially exciting changes in the distant future.
Whoa,
dear.
Gotta show off the tie.
We're looking toward the potential for El Nino here in a few months to arrive in Central Texas.
Yes, and we have some more topics that we're going to get into a look ahead of the rest of the week, I guess. Is that it?
We're not doing that at all. We're not doing the next week. We're doing the next few months.
Oh, okay. Big picture.
How about
Big
next summer?
picture.
Well, let's get into it. Nick, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so just a status check of where we're at right now. We look at the sea surface temperature anomaly, which is the signal of what phase of ENSO we're in. ENSO stands for El Nino Southern Oscillation. It can vary from 3 different phases. La Nina, which is what we're in now, that is indicative of cooler than normal temperatures in the eastern equatorial Pacific. That's what the bluish shading is here, those cooler than normal temperatures there. When the same area is warmer than normal, is indicative by half a degree Celsius or more, then we're in El Nino. And when the difference from average is not more than half a degree Celsius, then we're in ENSO neutral. And it does appear to be that La Nina, which we're in now, is on the way out, and ENSO neutral is on the way in. But now we're starting to see some signs of El Nino later this year, which we'll talk about. And a reminder that a La Nina pattern is most pronounced in the wintertime as far as impacts go, with drier than normal winter weather here in Central Texas and also warmer than normal. And clearly since the very beginning of winter, with only a couple of exceptions, Tommy, it has been both drier than normal and warmer than normal. We've barely had any rain, and we've certainly had our share of 80s.
Yeah, from December 1st, the start of meteorological winter, until the 10th of January, when I looked at this over the weekend, we were on par for our 3rd warmest so far, just looking through those dates. Since then, it's been not nearly as record-breaking as the start of 2026. And then the rain, of course, yesterday we had some showers, but Nick, when was the last time before? Was it the end of December?
Yeah, December 18th was the last rain before our recent very light rain. So you the data you looked at, 3rd warmest first half of winter, 3rd warmest beginning of winter. Is that what you found?
Yeah, through the 10th of January. I'd say even still now we're probably top 5. So that looks at the average mean temp. So that's the highs and the lows, everything all blended together. Definitely. And as you looked in early January too, we saw 88 degrees on the 2nd there. Several 80-degree days, and it's just been definitely unseasonably warm, but Nick, as you said, on par with this La Nina.
Yeah, and part of that is where the jet stream sets up, locking the much colder than normal air well to the north of us, and the storm track goes with it to the north of us, giving us limited opportunities for rounds of wet weather, wintry weather, and even cold. That's not to say we don't get cold in La Nina winters. We certainly usually get some bursts of cold here and there. We just have not had much of that so far this winter. Only one freeze so far in Austin at Camp Mabry, and some chillier days with highs in the 40s and 50s, but that's hardly as cold as it can get here locally. So what are we doing when we go ahead? Esme, we're looking ahead to the end of La Nina, which should be probably in the next month or so.
Before we get into El Nino, can you explain what is El Nino? We know what La Nina is. We just saw that this winter. But what is El Nino?
So El Nino is the warm phase of ENSO. That's where the temperatures are warmer than normal in the eastern equatorial Pacific. And El Nino can have impacts both in the hurricane season in the Atlantic, also impacts in the Pacific Ocean too for hurricane season. But then in the winter, it can typically mean wetter than normal and cooler than normal conditions here in Central Texas, which is basically the opposite of what we see during a La Nina winter. And so much of the drought that's just been building and generally speaking getting worse, with some exceptions where we've briefly got better, has been because so many of the last several winters have been La Nina winters where we've been so dry. Sure, we've had some rains in the spring and some wetter summers here and there, But the drier than normal pattern that's been setting up during a lot of our last few winters have really set us up for dry years, of which we are in such a rainfall deficit, Tommy.
Yeah, one of the things we looked at last winter and last summer was how we had that severe drought worsening, didn't get a lot of rain into that 2025 winter and the spring. And of course, enter in the summer, we had the severe drought, the warmer than normal temps. The triple digits obviously didn't verify, but still warmer than normal. Even the past 5 years plus, we've just been in this continuous toasty trend during the summer months.
Yeah, and some science has been pointing to the fact that when you're drier in the winter, then the ground dries out a bit. And as long as you don't get your typical spring rains or even an average spring, then you're more easily able to dry that ground out and heat it up in the summer, which in turn dries you out even more and dries the ground out even more. And with so many of our La Nina winters leading to dry winters for us, it's just been this vicious cycle that's been feeding the expansion of drought and our gradually increasing rainfall deficit, which is why we're so cautiously optimistic about turning back to El Nino later this year, because that would bring typically a wetter than normal winter for us. So let's talk about the forecast for ENSO going forward. The Climate Prediction Center through NOAA puts out this outlook once a month. I think it's the second Thursday of every month that they put out their outlook for ENSO for the months ahead. And at the bottom of your screen, and maybe we can take out that banner, Esme, it splits the forecast into 3-month increments that roll over one another. So DJF, as we often refer to meteorological winter as, December, January, February, and then January, February, March. So you can see there's some overlap here. And then February, March, April, and you can see what happens to the odds as we go through the year. So clearly we're still in La Nina. And then as we enter JFM, January, February, March, the odds of La Nina in the blue bars here go way down, and instead the odds of the gray, the neutral, ENSO neutral, go way up. So it is likely sometime within the next few weeks or month and a half or so, we'll be in that neutral period, which doesn't give a lot of telltale signs about what the weather can be expected here in Central Texas, Tommy, but it tells you what we're almost not likely to have, which is the La Nina one or the El Nino one.
The biggest thing that I'm thinking of, Nick, is last year we had that weak La Nina winter. Our first freeze of 2025 was January 6th. And
Super
then
late.
we still ended the season with more freezes than normal. We ended with 15. We averaged 12.
Yeah.
So when we're transitioning into this neutral pattern, that question poses, if the jet stream takes a little more of a dive through the plains, maybe even down toward the Four Corners, could that open the door for the later half of this winter? I'm thinking early, mid-February.
Yeah.
Could we see that big flip? All of a sudden, long cold periods are possible.
Yeah, it's certainly been backed up by some of the extended computer models that you and I geek out on off screen, is that if La Nina does in fact wrap up in time for February, our final month of meteorological winter, and then the jet stream not nearly as far away from us with the storm track, and it doesn't lock up the cold as significantly, then maybe, yes, we can get a little bit of last gasp cold and even wintry weather in the month of February. Still too early for the specifics there. And then we get into this neutral period as we head into the spring months with ENSO neutral dominating, of which there's no super big correlation between neutral ENSO and the weather that we have. And then we start looking ahead, if we can go back to the maps, to the odds of El Nino, the red bars here, which start to increase. And in fact, El Nino becomes favored, meaning having the highest odds of any of the three options by the time we get into June, July, and August. So summer, toward the middle end of summer. And then July, August, September, here the odds of El Nino go up even more. And then the odds go up even more for ASO, August, September, October. Now, there's been some studies, Tommy, about the predictability of ENSO for the following winter before you get through spring is not as accurate as once you get past spring. It's called the spring predictability barrier. So winter's not on this particular outlook anyway. It ends in October, ASO, August, September, October. So there's no guarantee that we would be looking at El Nino next winter anyway. But certainly our confidence about what next winter could pose will start to go up once we get through this spring.
Yeah, and it's the beginning of summer, right? That's when the spring predictability barrier, you start getting a better idea. So like next June, like this upcoming June for next winter would be when we get at least an idea of how things could shape up.
Yeah, and of course, as you get closer anyway to winter, your confidence goes up, right? But specifically, there's been some studies about getting over spring before that the odds and the likelihood of one phase of ENSO or another become a bit more likely.
And it plays a role into the tropics, right, with that El Nino?
Yeah. So we talked about El Nino winters being typically wetter here in Central Texas. But you're right, there is an impact in the tropics too, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. You can see here, maybe we should make the image full screen because some of the text is a bit small.
Tiny.
But you can see in the Caribbean there into portions of the rest of the Atlantic, part of the main development region anyway, not all of it. But fewer hurricanes in an El Nino summer and into fall too, due to stronger vertical wind shear and trade winds and greater atmospheric stability. So a few of those factors working against the development of hurricanes in El Nino. It doesn't mean you don't get any. And of course, as we often say, all it takes is one bad one to hit in the wrong place, and it's a memorable season, even if the number of hurricanes is lower. And then on the flip side, in the eastern Atlantic, you usually get more hurricanes due to less vertical wind shear. And sometimes those hurricanes in the eastern Pacific can get drawn in over Mexico and into Central Texas anyway, as we get especially into the fall months.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, both sides of Texas need to be looking out for this because the Gulf Coast, the Gulf was quiet this year, Nick, but as you said, sometimes that moisture gets pulled in. Those tropical downpours can create quite a problem. So something we have to watch as Texans, even if the Gulf this year, which we're hoping for, is quiet, Eastern Pacific can be sneaky.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, it's you never want a tropical system unless you want a weak one that brings us beneficial non-flooding rain.
Yes.
So they are necessary, but you don't want one of the higher end ones. Just some of that tropical moisture is nice if you're in a drought, depending on the severity of it. I did some digging, Tommy, on the rainfall in El Nino winters to sort of give you an idea and give people at home an idea about what a wetter than normal El Nino winter looks like. Should we go into those numbers?
Yeah, right. 2 years ago, things were looking a little soggy, very different than this winter, right?
Exactly. So an average El Nino winter gets almost 2 inches more rain, a little more than 2 inches more rain than a typical winter, which gets 7.25 inches of rain. So an El Nino winter gets 9.37 inches of rain. And then our last El Nino winter, the winter of 2023 to 2024, I'm trying to remember what year we're in now, had a little bit more than an average El Nino winter. And I remember going into that winter, and hope was there for a wet El Nino winter. And while we got the rain, people were hoping for way more. Even though 2 inches to the good here as far as rainfall goes in winter, which is usually our driest season, wasn't bad. It was actually our 29th wettest El Nino on record here a couple winters ago. So it was a beneficial winter rain, that's for sure. And not all El Nino winters actually produce wetter than normal conditions. But what we've found is over the course of the majority of them, they do, just not all. You can see here, there's that 23-24 winter, the one I just showed. That was actually a strong El Nino. That was wet. And then 2018-2019 was a weak El Nino, but that still ended up being wet and with a similar amount of rain to the strong El Nino that we had more recently. And then a very strong El Nino, 2015 to 2016, that winter, was actually much drier than normal, missing about 3 inches of rain compared to a typical winter. And then the El Nino before that, in 2014, 2015, was weak, like that 2018, 2019 one, But that one ended up being a dry El Nino rather than a wetter weak La Nina. Now that El Nino, sorry. But that 2014-2015 El Nino winter was not a huge departure from average, only missing about 3/4 of an inch of rain. And then back in 2009 to 2010, that El Nino winter was a moderately strong El Nino, and that one ended up being wet again with close to 9 inches of rain. So bottom line, it's not a guarantee that we get the rain from an El Nino winter, but more often than not, we do.
I think the biggest thing people are looking at with these numbers is how, and I don't want to jump the gun and talk about next summer already, but how potentially that El Nino, at least that neutral to transition El Nino, could create maybe not as oppressive as a spring into the early summer, and maybe a few rounds of showers can help fight this drought, because the latest update, we'll see tomorrow morning, but it's severe for, I think, the bulk of the counties we cover here.
Yeah, and that would be, it would depend on the pattern, because in the summer months, if the Atlantic is less active than normal, then we may be less likely to get any heat relief in the summer from the Atlantic or even the Gulf. It would just depend on whether we can still get systems developing in the Gulf and not farther south to still sneak in some moisture for us to bring us the clouds in the summer that are necessary to keep our temperatures down or not. And there's not as much as, a correlation between the phase of ENSO and our weather in the summer, aside from the tropics. That's why we focus so much on winter, because there's more of a connection there. But no doubt there are scientists focusing on the different phases and how they impact different seasons with a lower connection.
It'll still be hot.
Yeah, right. It'll still be hot either way. But I have found that there is a severe weather connection between the phase of ENSO in the spring that can sometimes lead to more or fewer rounds of hailstorms and tornadoes. But as this spring seems like we're heading into a neutral category, that almost doesn't apply so much.
Yeah.
That's all great information. As I'm sitting here and listening to both of you discuss this, what comes to mind is, does this mean that we are going to have no chances of a freeze for the remainder of our winter?
No, not at all.
Esme, you got to take notes or something. I'll hand you my notes beforehand.
Yeah, no, we're seeing some signs of cold late this month even this weekend. Saturday trending colder. Sunday morning we could get our next freeze. And then as La Nina seems to be ending into February, that could unlock some of that cold that we talked about coming back in, which would give us some more opportunities for a freeze. And you don't want to count winter out until you're at least through February, but sometimes not through March. So.
I would say, to piggyback off that, Esme, I would say a few more freezes for sure. And, you never know, early mid-February, just down with that first warning weather app, because things can take a turn here.
Yeah, and it's brand new, so easy to use, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a blog on all of this on kxan.com under the Weather and Traffic tab. The story there called Signs of El Nino as La Nina Fades. And we dig into some of the images here. You can see there the Ocean Nino Index, the ONI, how we've flipped back and forth between La Nina and El Nino there over the course of the last several decades. So there's a way to track that there with a link to how you can track it for yourself. We get updates on ENSO once a month from the Climate Prediction Center. So early February, we'll take a look at any tweaks or adjustments there. Really, it was 2-3 months ago that we started seeing some hints of El Nino, but that was way too early to jump on it. Now it's seeming a little bit more favorable toward the middle of this year and even toward the end of the year. But that's on kxan.com under the Weather and Traffic tab. Of course, we've got tons of great weather content there as well, including weather blogs. I know Tommy's always publishing content there. And then we've got Explore 2026 weather data, which are digital data extraordinaire. Christopher Adams, he's giving you all the stats you need or the stats you don't need about the weather through the year. And it's updated now for 2026.
Awesome. Any chance that this could change?
Of course.
The prediction?
Yeah,
and how probable?
Yeah, so we mentioned the spring predictability barrier. meaning you got to get through spring before the confidence goes up. So until beyond spring, early summer, there's very much the possibility that El Nino would be less likely going into the back half of 2026. So that's why we want you to keep checking back with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for sitting here and chatting with us about El Nino and some predictions for this year. And we will see you both next week.
Thank you both.
That's all we have for you all today. Don't forget to download our free KXAN Plus streaming app anywhere you get your streams, and keep up with us online at kxan.com. We'll see you next week.